All right, let's wind the clock way back. I'm talking 300 years to 1722 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And look, we're not going to talk about famous battles or powdered wigs. No, we're going to get our hands dirty and see what life was actually like, day in and day out.
You know, we all have this kind of blurry picture of colonial life, but what was the reality on the ground? What did it feel like? What were the things people were genuinely worried about when they woke up in the morning?
So to get to the bottom of that, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to embed ourselves for one full year with a real family, piecing together their story from old court documents and historical records. Let's meet the Seavers.
Okay, so let's dive in. Our story is set in Framingham, which back then was pretty much a frontier town in Massachusetts, and at the very heart of it all is one household, just trying to carve out a life for themselves.
So here's our cast of characters. You've got Joseph, the father. He's 50 years old, a mason by trade, but also a farmer. His wife, Mary, is 43, and she's basically the manager of the entire household operation. Then there are the 6 kids at home. Robert, at 19, is pretty much his dad's right-hand man. Mary, who's 15, is learning all the skills she'll need to run her own home someday. Then you've got Nathaniel, Hannah, Elizabeth, and little 2-year-old Abigail. That's 8 people, all living and working right on top of each other.
And their world? It was small, and it was demanding. Just picture it. A simple wooden house, maybe just a couple of main rooms, with a loft where the kids all slept. The centerpiece of the whole place was this massive fireplace. It was their only source of heat, and it was their kitchen. Every single day, from the moment they woke up, was laser-focused on one single challenge, feeding those 8 hungry mouths.
For a family like the Seavers, a clock on the wall or a calendar, that stuff was secondary. Their true boss, the thing that dictated their every move, was the rhythm of the seasons. The agricultural year wasn't just some guide, it was the absolute engine of their survival.
You can see right here how relentless that cycle was. Spring was all about plowing and planting. Summer was a constant, grinding battle of weeding and tending to the crops. Fall was just an all-out sprint to get the harvest in, and winter, well, winter was for the indoor work of mending and making. There was no off-season. There was no break.
So in the spring, you'd find Joseph and his son Robert out in the fields from sunrise to sunset, working the soil with their oxen. At the same time, Mary and the older daughters were planting the huge kitchen garden that would keep them fed. Then summer hits, and it's all hands on deck. The entire family, I'm talking even 8-year-old Elizabeth, would be pulled in for everything from weeding the fields to churning butter to the absolutely mind-numbing job of bird scaring duty. Can you imagine? Standing in the cornfields for hours just to shoo birds away?
But nothing, and I mean nothing, compared to the fall. The harvest was just this frantic, desperate race against the weather. Every single stalk of corn, every bit of hay, every last apple had to be brought in, processed, and stored away. Their entire survival through that long, cold, dark New England winter depended on the work they crammed into those few intense weeks.
Right. So their world wasn't just dirt and crops. The Seavers were part of a really tight-knit and, let's be honest, very strict Puritan community. So let's take a look at how this world of social rules and obligations shaped their lives.
And right at the center of their world was the meeting house. Now, this place wasn't just a church. It was the town hall, it was the community center, and it was the courthouse, all rolled into one building. And yeah, showing up on Sunday, that wasn't just encouraged, it was the law. Now, you have to understand, Joseph Seaver, this guy was under a ton of pressure. He'd been sued for debt before. He was juggling lands that he both rented and owned. He's 50 years old, which was getting up there for the time, and he has that big family to feed. Every single hour of daylight was precious.
And in 1722, all that pressure led to this. This is from a real court record. Joseph Seaver was officially charged with not attending public worship. And in their world, that was a huge deal. It was a serious offense that came with fines and, maybe worse, public shame.
So the question is, why? Why would he risk the fines and the humiliation? Well, the only answer that makes sense is just desperation. The temptation to use those precious daylight hours on a Sunday for work that could mean the difference between his family eating or going hungry, it must have been just overwhelming. It was a massive gamble between his duty to God and his duty to his family.
But of course, it wasn't all grim and serious. Community life had its fun moments too. The militia training day was required by law, but really, it turned into a town-wide festival with food and games. And they had these working bees, like when the whole community would get together for a corn husking. It mixed hard labor with a chance to socialize, and for the young people, it was a chance to meet and court each other. Work and community were just completely woven together.
Okay, so what happens when that brutal winter finally hits and drives everyone indoors? Well, the work definitely didn't stop. It just changed. This was the season for a totally different kind of labor and a different kind of learning.
Think about this for a second. For Mary and her daughters, the winter was all about making textiles, taking raw wool or flax, spinning it into thread, then weaving that thread into cloth, and finally sewing that cloth into a single shirt was a monumental task. We're talking days and days of labor for one shirt, and every piece of clothing they owned was made this way from scratch.
And what about school? Well, it was basic, it was practical, and it was completely different depending on if you were a boy or a girl. Boys like Robert and Nathaniel, they learned just enough reading, writing, and math to run a farm and read the Bible. The girls, though, their education was almost entirely focused on domestic skills, learning to cook, spin, weave, and manage a household. That was their curriculum.
So picture this, those long, dark winter evenings. Everyone gathered around the only source of light and heat in the house, the fire. And while their hands were kept busy mending tools or spinning thread, their entertainment was simple. It was stories. Family histories, local ghost stories, memories passed down from one generation to the next. This was their Netflix, their podcast feed, and their library, all rolled into one.
So as we wrap up our year with the Seavers, you start to see the bigger picture. 1722 wasn't just a year of backbreaking labor. It was a year of transition. It was absolutely defined by hardship, yeah, but also by hope and by the building of a legacy.
I mean, think about this. At 50 years old, Joseph was considered an old man. Life expectancy was just so much shorter back then. And his oldest son, Robert, was 19, right on the edge of adulthood, getting ready to marry and start his own farm. You can feel the generational gears turning. The family's future was literally taking shape right there.
And this is what all that hardship was for. They weren't just struggling to get by day to day. No, they were actively building something. They were building a family that would survive and grow. They were building a farm, carving it right out of the wilderness. And most important of all, they were building a foundation for the next generation. All that work was an investment in a future they might not even live to see themselves.
The Seavers story is one of relentless work, of real hardship, but ultimately it's about building something that lasts. And it kind of leaves us with a pretty powerful question to chew on. In our world of convenience and constant distraction, what are we building with the time we have?